Hello, I'm Mark Ellen. Thanks for clicking this word in your ear, the latest of hundreds of conversations David Hepworth and I have had on this podcast we started 17 years ago. Some with ourselves, others with musicians, authors, comedians, and other people we like. If you enjoy them and want to support us and keep it all coming and get extra entertainment, including the weekly quiz and a special event on your birthday, visit patreon.com/wordinyour-ear or just like or subscribe in whatever way you prefer.
You're listening to a podcast from The Word.
So, Amanda Seyfried, are we saying that right?
I guess we are. It was her from Mamma Mia, wasn't it? I think, and various other things. Yeah.
Hollywood actress appears on The Tonight Show the other day and just happens to bring along her dulcimer and performs what was an eerily accurate impression of Joni Mitchell, kind of mid-period, I suppose, 1973, Joni Mitchell singing California. Absolutely extraordinary, wasn't it?
It's fantastic. It's fantastic.
Also,
dulcimer, a very difficult instrument. Very, very hard. You play it on your lap. You play it with your hands above it like a piano. Phenomenal technique. And she said that she'd learned it in lockdown. Probably did, I don't know. That's how she spent her time. And it was just extraordinarily accurate. It just struck me that you get more and more of this now, don't you?
You do, because here's the big question is, and she's not a musician. Obviously she's got musical talent, but she's an actress. And she sings and plays on the side. But my question is nowadays is the general standard of musicianship higher or lower than it was back in the day, whenever the day was? Because it seems to me more often than not, it's higher. The level of accomplishment of the average player nowadays seems higher than it was. And is this a direct result of the fact that kind of tuition and hints and technology and all the means that might make you better, all the means of improvement, are far more at people's fingertips now than they've ever been at any stage in the past?
I'm sure that's true.
Because it used to be Bert Whedon's Playing a Day, which was the joke.
Sheet music was, you wanted to learn a song, you bought the kind of sheet music, and that was basically a transcription, a tabulation of often the piano chords. And they were often just wrong. Actually.
Completely wrong.
What struck me, I remember trying to learn the guitar in the late 60s, early 70s, that what you did is if somebody knew a song, you would go round to their house. I can remember a mate of mine, William, had learned how to play Hesitation Blues. And I can remember going to his house and sitting there all day trying to work it out. If somebody had some particular chord that you didn't know, you went and learned it. McCartney used to say this, didn't he? He said that the Beatles, that story about him supposedly getting on a bus and going all the way across Liverpool.
Two buses.
Yeah, yes. two buses to learn B7. I love that idea. But, if you look at it now, any song, if you pick a really difficult song like Cry Me a River with those complicated jazz chords, you will find several tutorials. And those tutorials are usually by rather studenty looking blokes in baseball caps, sitting on a porch in California. And they will show you not only what the chords are, but they will show you precisely how to pick them. There may be tabulation there too. So all of that is available. Whereas, if we wanted to learn Angie by David Graham, you had to go and find somebody who could play it and sit down and painstakingly work it out. There's a guy now who does a thing called Beatles Explained on Instagram. And he goes through the chord sequences and structures of Beatles songs, not just how those songs work, but the other 2 or 3 Beatles songs that use precisely that sequence at one point. It's absolutely fascinating. So, there's nothing you can't learn. And it's interesting that Joni Mitchell Nobody used to cover Joni Mitchell because you couldn't work out how she played it. Joni Mitchell, of course, had polio, and her left hand was very badly damaged by that, and she couldn't form conventional chord patterns. So she invented her own way of playing things, and she invented her own tunings. Nobody could work out how she did it, and now that there is someone explaining it to you.
Daylight is now flooding in on magic, isn't it? In a big way because of YouTube, I suppose. And I think I sent you these things this morning. I can remember first seeing, there's a bit of footage of Lowell George being interviewed in 1977, Lowell George, the Little Feat, being interviewed in 1977 by, I think, a Dutch or a German fan magazine in a hotel room, and somebody obviously has some cine camera or something. It wouldn't even have been a video in 1977, would it? I don't think so. And just explaining how he plays bottleneck guitar, and he plays China White, and Sam Clayton's in there with him. They harmonize with him. And I can remember when I first saw this bit of footage, which would have been many years later, it was thrilling beyond measure to see that kind of thing, because you never saw that kind of thing. And even when I dug up and Whistle Test in 1984, and I don't know why we did it, but it must have been the producer's idea. We did some edition of the program which was kind of in praise of the electric guitar, and we got Rich Thompson in, among others. I think.
Oh, I remember that.
Who was the other guitarist? I can't remember. Rich Thompson just demonstrated with his guitar, how Buddy Holly played and how Mark Knopfler played and whatever, and that was similarly thrilling. Whereas now, you go on YouTube and you could stay from here till doomsday just watching, famous guitar players or students of famous guitar players explaining how they did things and showing how.
There's one of Jimmy Page, isn't there, showing the Edge and Jack White how to play Kashmir. There's one I've seen several times actually, which is Ringo talking to Dave Stewart, and he shows him the drum pattern to Ticket to Ride. Incredibly complicated. Bruce Springsteen on Howard Stern talking about why he never uses bar chords.
Which I never realised. And a lot of this is it's quite interesting. It's demystifying in a way, isn't it? Bruce Springsteen says, I don't play bar chords. Why not? He says they're too hard. And, I don't feel that you can slide up and down the neck effectively. I just don't do it. It says 40 years, I haven't done it.
Bob Marley never did either. Bob Marley had a way of playing with his enormous left-hand thumb coming across. Right. Where he can play just, a different shape. Never plays bar chords.
And I discovered this morning there's inevitably, there's a drum instructional channel called Drumeo. Which if I was a serious drummer, you would subscribe to and so forth. But there you can see, people, famous drummers, here they are 40, 50 years later, explaining how they did it, and kind of getting paid for it in many senses, and the technology of video and the way they can animate this whole thing so that somebody sitting at home can work out exactly how to do it. It's absolutely extraordinary how it's come on leaps and bounds.
Before it was just person to person, wasn't it?
Absolutely.
Rishikesh with Donovan teaching John Lennon that finger-picking pattern that he then used on Julia and Dear Prudence and all those things, that he got from directly sitting down with Donovan. It's funny, and I think that we used, when you were in bands back in our day, everybody played the same songs because they were really simple. You played I'm Waiting for the Man, you played Louie Louie, you played Johnny Be Good because they were all three chords. I'm imagining now that people form groups and probably are playing Radiohead and stuff like that. Maybe old Steely Dan. I don't know, really.
I suppose so.
And one of the reasons people played Dylan all the time was that Dylan was incredibly simple. It was all C, G, A minor, D minor, F, nothing fancy. No diminished chords, no augmented chords, no sixths, nothing like that. It wasn't until Dylan got on to kind of Love and Theft and Poor Boy and Summer Days and stuff that it got complicated. And I rather imagine actually that his musical directors would have come in and said, his advisors in the band would have said, why don't you use this chord instead? That's the jazz chord. I don't know, but very simple, very straightforward.
The other thing I was looking at this morning, which, boy, it takes you back, is Brian May talking about the guitar his dad made for him, back in, when we're talking about the late 50s or something like this. And it's quite interesting. Brian
Is that the
May,
one he still plays?
yeah, apparently so.
Yeah, I think so.
Brian May, he's quite well spoken. You get the idea. Brian May came from a kind of comfortable middle class background, don't you? I may be wrong, but that's the impression you get.
Yeah.
Why did your dad make a guitar? Well, he was very good at that kind of thing, and we couldn't afford to buy one. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's a vanished world. That is.
Well, yeah, and they were fantastically expensive, weren't they?
I suppose so. Even with hire purchase, they were, weren't they? And
rare things, and they were nearly always imported.
Yeah. I suppose, they would still be imported at that point. No, it's absolutely extraordinary, the wealth of stuff just on YouTube showing you how to basically copy things. That's what it's doing mainly. You want to make the sound of Whole Lot of Love, or you want to get Bruce Springsteen's vocal sound, if you're, because a lot of this is about recording technology and desktop recording technology and Logic and, and GarageBand and all that kind of stuff. So now it's not just how to play stuff, it's how to record stuff so that you get Bruce Springsteen's vocal sound as it existed after Bob Clearmountain had mixed the records, all the tricks, every little trick.
All that stuff that would have cost thousands and thousands of pounds to engineer at the time. You can now just do it on your laptop.
Somebody is working out how everything was done.
Yeah.
That's what's happening. You've suddenly got massive access to the tools that allow people to take this stuff apart and put it back together again and work out how it was done. So as I said, daylight flooding in on Magic, and you ask yourself, is that a good thing?
The Word Podcast, prime cuts of popular culture served fresh each week.
There was that piece that we've both read in The Atlantic this week, really interesting, I thought, about how Gen Z were far less likely to be in a romantic relationship than earlier generations. Only half of Gen Z adults said they'd ever been in a romantic relationship, compared with 76% of boomers. And you wonder what this means for pop music's time-honoured relationship with romance. I thought that was really interesting, actually. And I wondered why, if that's true, which it clearly is, why that was. I've got a few theories. One of them, Dave, is that teenagers are spending much longer living with the parents, don't you think? I mean, when we were kids, rent was very cheap. And, I left to go to college when I was 18 or whatever. And I never came back. That was it. I'd left home. And you all lived in flats and, you had a different kind of life. But if you're living with your parents, and that extends, I know lots of my kids, friends, in their late 30s and 40s, still living with their parents, would that affect the way that you conduct your relationships? I don't know. It's possible.
Well, it's interesting. It's complicated, that is, because, the biggest incentive to leave home when you were in our, late 60s or whatever, was the only way you could sleep with a partner was sleeping under your own roof. You couldn't do it under your parents' roof. It would simply not have been allowed.
No.
That's changed. You've probably noticed.
Move your girlfriend into the attic. That's absolutely fine.
That ship
if you can
sailed,
chip in on the electricity bill, that'd be brilliant.
That ship sailed long ago. We're all perfectly used to encountering people we'd never met in the kitchen on the
padding
Sunday
about
morning.
in their pajamas.
We've done that kind of thing. Whereas,
where's the coffee? Who are you?
So much of the kind of, when I think about pop music's relationship with teenage romance, so much of it was driven by the fact that it was kind of furtively pursued, wasn't it?
Yeah.
You couldn't be open about it. It was all about secret loves and notes passed in class and letters sent. And, and I often think about Brian Wilson wrote about this stuff very well, In My Room. And wouldn't it be nice? Wouldn't it be nice if we were older? Then we wouldn't have to wait so long.
Yes.
It was all about a fantasy,
the whole night through.
A fantasy of being married.
Yes.
Departing the family home and playing mums and dads somewhere, wasn't it? It's a very cute idea, that kind
Couldn't
of
wait
thing.
to be grown up, whereas the reverse is true now, I think. That adolescence just goes on indefinitely, doesn't
That's
it?
true.
You've got 40-year-olds who are still kind of basically 15 and they're sort of going down and opening the fridge and going, where's the food? There's nothing in here I like.
You only know that they've been anywhere by the presence of cereal bowls on the arms of chairs.
That's right.
Which are the infallible sign of the overgrown teenager the world over. But when I think back to those kind of early days of teenage romance, the drama, it was replete with drama, wasn't it? I mean, I don't know if you remember this, but if anybody wanted to get in touch with you, a girlfriend or somebody, or you wanted to ring them, you had to ring the family home. And there was
that awful thing.
phone.
There'd be only one phone, and people would be listening.
Of course they would.
So you'd have to talk in a kind of coded way. You couldn't express any kind of fondness.
Where would the phone be?
Usually in the hall. In the
hall.
So the entire household could hear, and both parties would have their families listening.
Yes.
Oh, it was just agony.
I used to contact girlfriends. I used to just go for a walk and call from a phone box at the top of the road. Just to avoid that kind of thing. But the drama. My pet theory is that so much great pop music was about entering rooms.
Yes.
It was either directly about, the greatest pop song
When
ever.
You Walk in the Room by Jackie Shannon. What a fantastic song.
It's the greatest pop song ever written. No doubt about it at all.
I agree.
It's all about, the shock and excitement when your intended or whatever, your object of love object.
It's electrifying. The whole atmosphere changes. Yeah. Heartbeat goes up.
Yeah, absolutely. And so songs are a lot of songs are right directly about
that. That room, my heart went boom. There's so many examples of it.
Yeah, I saw standing there. And then he kissed me, and he walked up to me and he asked me if I wanted to dance. Yeah. He looked kind of nice, and so I thought I might take a chance. When we danced, he held me tight and and I felt so happy, I almost died. And then he kissed me.
Fantastic.
Drama.
You walked into the party like you were walking onto a yacht.
Yes,
that's a great opening.
It is.
Because you're looking at this person and trying to imagine what they look like.
Well, Bruce Springsteen.
And immediately you're told about the hat being strategically dipped over one eye.
Thunder Road, Bruce Springsteen. The screen door slams, Mary's dress waves.
Yeah.
It's the beginning of the evening. It was dating, which was not a word that we ever really used in Britain.
No.
But obviously that was Americanism. Was just dramatic. Wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I don't know, social media, all these kind of things have, again, demystified these things, So where are, most people likely to meet their significant other? It used to be in my parents' generation, it would be dancing. And when in my generation, it would still probably be dancing as well.
Yeah.
But then that changed, because dancing changed. And now it's most likely to be, online.
I would have thought so. Because that's another thing, I think, is that if you're used to, we grew up in a world where most entertainment was done socially. Entertainment was something that involved other people. Whatever you did, it was probably two or three of you. It wasn't necessarily you at home amusing yourself, which is not the case now. It is largely, isn't it? People sitting there and looking at some form of digital entertainment. And the more you become involved in that kind of solo occupation, the harder it must be to accommodate other people into the rigid world you've constructed. Don't you think there's something in that?
Yeah,
must be
definitely.
hard.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the other indicators of affection that were kind of roughly musical. I mean, clearly people don't make tapes for each other anymore, do they? I mean, do they make playlists?
Well, they must make playlists, I think. But tapes,
think
there was something the amount of effort that went into a tape. And the agony about, oh, God, if I now put them in the wrong order, will they think there's a connection between the hidden coded message about putting that song, following that song after that song? I don't know. It was agony. But I guess they send playlists. I don't know. But that was a big part of it, wasn't it?
Do people still request tunes for each other on radio programs?
Well, would they be listening to the kind of radio programs that would do requests? Probably not.
Well, I don't know. Does it still go on your Radio 1? It probably still does, One Extra, whatever. Do people still have our tune? Do you remember how long that ran for? Was it Simon Bates? It was Simon Bates, wasn't it? The people were in
tune you shared, that's right.
Yeah.
The concert you met at or whatever
Did you and the missus have a tune?
We had some Bob Dylan songs. We had Intensified, the album Intensified by Scar. The Scar album Intensified was just a big favourite for some reason. We always used to play it in the car. But did we have any tunes? Yeah, I'm afraid to say most of them were just Dylan things that we just really jointly loved. That's boring, isn't it? How about you? Go on.
I've still got. We have 2 copies of Sweet Baby James by James Taylor.
Oh, great!
One's got my name on it, and one's got her name.
Oh, that's lovely.
They came together.
Hands off my copy.
They came together.
You scratch my copy of
all those years ago. Yeah.
Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah. So, are teenagers no longer in love? That's the big question, and what does that mean for pop music? Well, we'd be interested in your responses to it. Actually, at this point, Mark, do you know what we should talk about?
Go on.
We talk about our one-man show.
Oh, yeah.
We're doing our famous one-man show, which we previously did. We took it to the Shetland Islands, didn't we?
We've only done it once or twice. We did we did it at Larne Festival, actually, in Wales, didn't we?
Oh, we did? Okay.
Yeah, we just did a thing about the decades, things about the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, whatever. And then we did just old yarns, didn't we? Smash Hits, Whistle Test, Live Aid. Smash Hits is a rich area.
Absolutely.
It's interesting how many people we've done recently on the podcast who we put on the cover of Smash Hits.
Absolutely.
It's phenomenal, isn't it? Mary Wilson, Claire Grogan.
Yeah.
Gary Newman, Gary Kemp. We did Nick Kershaw the other day. We did Howard Jones.
Sparks.
Neil Tennant.
I was just thinking of Sparks because we talked to
Russell
Mail yesterday. And of course, Sparks were on the cover of Smash Hits.
They were.
Really good cover, actually.
Early on, it was a fantastic
Very early on.
He was terrific.
So our one-man show is of particular interest if you're in the Dorset area, because it's on April the 4th, which is not far away, and it's taking place. Very rock and roll.
How rock and roll is this? The Priory Church of Lady St Mary, Wareham, Dorset.
There you go. If you're anywhere near Wareham, within reach of Wareham, so I don't know, Southampton, Bournemouth, Poole, Weymouth, whatever, anywhere out there, we'd be delighted to see you at the Priory Church of Lady St Mary in Wareham on April the 4th, which is a Friday. And there will be audience participation. There will be, in the words of that old Dandelion Records sampler, there will be some fun going forward. Okay?
And there may be a quiz with a jar of chutney or a marrow.
Don't get people too excited, Mark. Anyway, details of how to get tickets below.
This is a junction in the word podcast. It separates that bit from this next bit.
Fantastic piece that was reproduced actually in The Guardian this week by Neil Tennant, who'd been asked by a Russian newspaper, Novaya Gazeta Europe, to write about his feelings about the events in Russia. Really interesting. It's an independent Russian newspaper that's now in Latvia. Because
yes, not done in Russia. Yeah, not done in Russia.
To avoid,
you can't run an independent newspaper in Russia.
They left Russia a while ago to retain their independence. And I thought it was an absolutely wonderful piece. I must put a link to it at the bottom of this, actually. And he talks about his memories of old Russia. And it's interesting that the Pet Shop Boys were, from the off, actually, enormously popular there. Various bands are very, very popular in Russia. Radiohead's one, Depeche Mode, Massive Attack. But the Pet Shop Boys, huge. And they went there, they launched MTV Russia in 1993. And it's just a lovely story about being met at the airport in a limousine that they discovered used to belong to Gorbachev. So they were swept into Moscow in Gorbachev's limousine. They performed in Red Square for Live 8. When was Live 8? 2005, wasn't it?
Right.
And it just talks about what a wonderful world it was. You know, he said one time we couldn't get a taxi. The police drove us back to our hotel from a gay club. You cannot imagine the old world of Russia. Have you ever been there? We went. We went in 1990, just before the regime ended, just before the coup, and Gorbachev was apprehended in his dacha. And things change. And from that moment, you felt this enormous optimism. I can remember going there and going to the market, the Gom market, and finding that there were only about 6 or 7 pop albums available, and they were all pirate or bootleg copies. And they were McCartney and Queen and Kate Bush and Elton John, the Pink Floyd, and you couldn't buy any Western music directly. And it's just really sweet, Neil talking about just what a fantastic world it was and how optimistic it felt at the time. And he's written this great song called Hymn, Free Russia from the Poison of Putin. Really, really, I love the way Neil does all this stuff. He's very politically aware and he campaigns, but he never, ever kind of presents himself as an activist. Do you know what I mean? He just quietly gets on with it, you know. I thought it was very moving. And we should stick a link to it at the end of this.
No, it's extraordinary to think, isn't it, that they to reflect on that kind of wave of optimism that that sort of pop music's been around long enough, and the Pet Shop Boys have been around long enough to be there before the wave of optimism, to then experience the wave of optimism, and then to feel it go dark again. You know?
Yes.
You don't expect pop music to be around long enough to see moments change and then change back. It tended to be, it was one-way traffic in the past.
Completely. It's now infinitely worse than it was when we were out there, and the regime that everyone was complaining about at the time. Extraordinary.
Yeah.
The other thing I couldn't resist following in the paper last week was the stuff about the King's playlist. Did you see that?
Yeah.
King Charles has posted his playlist. It's a Spotify playlist, and it's just so funny that the way it's always analysed by people who sort of take it seriously, as if he really might genuinely like this music. You know what I mean? You know, the idea that it's meant to be a musical journey that spans 10 decades. You know, people are going, wow, that's so interesting that King Charles really likes Kylie Minogue, you know, all this kind of stuff. And it's basically one of those things that should be approved for the Commonwealth, isn't it? You know, does he really? Is he a massive fan of Afro beats? You know, with a particular penchant for Davido of Nigeria. He's got Daddy Limber from Ghana in there. He's got Millie Small and Bob Marley from Jamaica. He's got Dame Kiri Kanawa from New Zealand, Kylie Australia, Miriam Makeba from South Africa, Anushka Shankar India. I mean, it's just one of those things where they just mapped off the Commonwealth.
I looked at it and thought, Well, there's only one of these, one track here that I think you might probably like. And that was a track by Michael Bublé. And then, of course, I realized Michael Bublé's Canadian.
He's Canadian.
So that's obviously the reason. Yeah. The reason he's in there is in there as well.
People just try very hard to think that, I read something somewhere, he put in Diana Ross's Upside Down. They're saying how amazing this is. It must have evoked memories of being at kind of posh discos when he was young. Well, Upside Down, let's be honest, came out in 1980. How old was the King in 1980? I think he was about 32 or 33 years old.
Yeah.
So this is just a complete and utter nonsense. But I love the way that it's taken so seriously in NLS, where actually this has been thrashed together by a load of advisors.
There will be a load of advisors, all from different Commonwealth countries, all sitting there chin stroking and, and arguing, I'll give you RCB if you let me have Kylie Minogue or whatever, This is what courtiers do nowadays, They no longer kind of, they're no longer the groom of the stool, all the arcane roles in the king's wardrobe.
Yeah,
they're now in charge of Spotify playlists, and it's like, who's impressed, for goodness sake? I mean, actually, I think Prince Charles, I cannot stop calling him Prince Charles.
I know, I'm still finding it hard to call him the King.
It's absolute.
In the same way, I find it hard to sing "God Save the King."
Absolutely, it's wrong to me.
It's still the Hammersmith Odeon to me. You can't change.
You cannot change it. And I think you should have the nerve to say, "Do you know, I don't like music much. I don't care about music. There's other things. I talk to plants or whatever. I'm bothered about architecture." Why does everybody have to pretend to like music?
Well, it's like everyone has to pretend to like football.
Yeah.
It's compulsory to support a football team. If you don't, there's something wrong with you. Well, it is perfectly possible to not like football.
Yes, for years. And of course, this is another thing that we kind of have reflected on from time to time. Isn't it extraordinary, that England won the World Cup in 1966 at the very high point of British pop superiority, around the world, the Beatles, the Stones, the Harleys, Donovan, I don't know, everybody else. And yet there was no meeting at the time between pop music and football. Just didn't happen. There wasn't even, in 1966, there wasn't even an England pop song. It's an extraordinary thing.
Is that right?
There was a World Cup Willie song, because he was the mascot of the whole tournament. Yeah. But I'm pretty sure of this. There was no actual England song. The first England song was in the 1970 World Cup, which was Back Home, of course. Back home, they'll be thinking about us, they'll be cheering us on and all that, and we know what happened there. Anyway, but there was no connection. And although I think there is a picture of Paul McCartney going to Wembley, and I think Everton were in a cup final. I'm sure some Everton supporters will correct us on this. And I think that was the only case of the Beatles and football ever crossing each other's paths.
They had no interest in
which
football.
Which is extraordinary. When you
it is amazing.
When they came from Liverpool.
I know. They had every reason to be. All the Liverpool stars, my God.
Nowadays, it would be the first thing a group would be expected to, a group from Liverpool would have to tell you. It'd be compulsory. It'd be absolutely compulsory.
You'd have to be seen, going to home games, going to away games, whatever, just flying the flag.
It's ridiculous. I've said it before, Michael Owen got a load of stick because he said, I don't like films. I've only seen about 6 films. And people said, you can't possibly say, how can you not like The Godfather or whatever? Well,
why should he?
Why should he?
Exactly.
There's loads of people who take no interest in football, and that's fine as well. You can take no interest in all manner of things.
Yeah.
Just be interested in what you're in.
I'm not interested in wildlife or nature. Well, fine, okay, don't worry. Let's not give you a hard time about it. You're missing out, I think, but never mind.
Yeah. Maybe you'll change your mind in due course. Anyway, what else have we got to say?
We've talked to various people, haven't we, recently? All sorts of people. John King from the Gang of Four was terrific. He was really, really good.
He was very good.
Incredibly funny, really self-mocking, and didn't take anything seriously.
About bumping into John Lennon in Sevenoaks High Street or whatever it was in 1967, on the very day that John Lennon bought not 1967. Yeah, it would be early 1967. On the very day he bought the circus poster that inspired Beaning for
It was February 67 because they were making the Strawberry Fields Penny Lane video in Knoll Park, weren't they? And he came out with his Mr. Kite poster. And he bumped into him at age 11. He was 11, John King. That was really good. Yeah. Mike Rutherford we talked to. Who was really good. Mike Rutherford.
What a nice chap.
Fabulous bloke. Talking about the early Genesis concerts and how they used to get £7 to play. And he still had the contracts, which he described as being like yellowing parchment. Just a lovely idea of Genesis for £7. We talked to Russell Mael.
I have to let let viewers in on a secret, actually. There are of the millions... excuse me, of the millions of word in your ear conversations we recorded, that was the first one that began with Mark Ellen and Mike Rutherford both talking about having hip operations because he'd done his...
He'd broken his hip.
He'd broken his hip in his skiing accident. And you did your hip 2 years ago or whatever it was.
Bike. That's right.
Off a bike. So two old codgers talking about their hip replacements.
So that
not replacements. Yeah, not getting any younger. But yeah, Mike Rutherford.
We talked to Russell Mael. That's going to be up in week or two's time. Russell Mael, fantastic. Talking about his mum taking him to see the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl. He was really
And in Las Vegas, she drove them
to Las Vegas to see the Beatles the second time. He was really fantastic. And really good about how much he loved the British groups as opposed to the kind of what he described as the faux honesty of Laurel Canyon. So it was a really good point. All those people, here I am strumming my acoustic guitar. It's just me, in my jeans. I'm not putting on an act here. He was saying how much he loved acts. He loved the Kinks or the Move and the clothes they wore and their haircuts and their attitude and their stage show. And he said there was just as much honesty in that, which there is. Nick Kershaw we talked to, didn't we? We were talking about him earlier. Nick Kershaw, who was really good too. Just talking about Live Aid. We got 4 songs at Live Aid. We think that's amazing, isn't it?
We think he got one of Elvis Costello's songs.
Only allowed one, so there must have been some trade-off there, I think. And we talked to John Harris. That was the other John Harris, who's written a fantastic book about his connections with his son through music. And John Harris, there's a lovely bit. John Harris is the Guardian and Observer writer. I'm sure you're all familiar with him. He's in the pop press with us. And he talked about discovering the Beatles. It was just a brilliant story about, he got back home one day and there was a copy of Sgt. Pepper he'd found. He must have been about, 6 or 7 at the time. And it had been left out for him, I think, to amuse him. And in it was still all the stickers.
The moustaches.
And the moustache. And he cut the moustache out and stuck it up his nose and put on Sgt. Pepper. And this was a kind of life-changing moment. I thought it was really, really good, really interesting.
So that's what we've been doing. And if you've been, if you're a Patreon supporter, you get early access to full unexpurgated versions of all this material. And if you haven't become a Patreon supporter and you'd like to, if you go to patreon.com/word in your ear, you can find out how you could do that and how you could get involved. And maybe you would be joining us on the occasion of your birthday to throw a log on the Word in Your Ear fire, as was the case with, who was our guest, Mark?
David Messa.
David Messa. Here he comes.
Talking about Lou Reed albums. It was really, really interesting. And here he is.
The Word Podcast. Fix yourself a drink and it's like being in the pub.
And we're joined by David Messa. David, and you are zooming us from your record store in Sydney, in Australia. So what's the record store called? In fact, you've just given us a little glimpse of it. It looked fantastic. We've seen around it.
Okay,
what's it called?
So the record store is called Tengu Records, Tengu. That's because we specialize in Japanese pressings, not Japanese music, but Japanese pressing.
Yeah. Wow.
So most of our albums are from the 60s or 70s, like very vintage, no new records. And Tengu is a mythical Japanese creature that's half man, half monkey. I'll just show you our T-shirt. You get the idea.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Specialised in Japanese pressings.
Yeah, so this is
Very nice.
that's our newest T-shirt.
That is phenomenally niche, actually.
Well, you'd think it's niche, but actually they're incredibly popular all around the world. Because after the oil crisis, the vinyl quality in other countries deteriorated, especially Australia, but also UK, US. But the Japanese somehow kept high-quality vinyl. So those, from about 1974 onwards, most albums sound better on a Japanese pressing than a...
So does yours say on the outside, your shop, does it say above the door, only Japanese pressings?
Oh, no, because we don't only sell Japanese pressings. We sell whatever, we get lots of other things, and I can show you some interesting things we've got.
What's the furthest somebody's come to buy a record from you? Because you must be a bit of a destination, I would have thought.
Well, we've only been open since Saturday.
Oh,
we actually... But I did have someone come from Brighton yesterday, so there you go.
Well, there we go. That's a start. That's good.
He was a DJ looking for reggae 45s. Yeah. But we did open on Saturday, and that you're probably going to ask him what I did on my birthday. On my birthday, I opened a record store.
Well, most people would say that's a perfect way to spend your birthday.
And how do you want to fan the flames of discourse? Then you have an item you want to discuss.
It's not very highbrow and probably a bit obsessive, but my item is that Lou Reed made the two greatest live albums ever. That's my...
Go on. These are?
And they're not Rock and Roll Animal, which is, I know, very highly regarded, but the two are... The Velvet Underground's 1969.
Yes.
And even more so, Take No Prisoners from 1978.
Right. I don't know Take No Prisoners at all.
You don't know it?
No, I don't.
It was during the period of, he did stereo binaural recording, which is, they had two microphones on a foam head, so it was like the listener was there. So no multi-tracking. It was recorded 1978, just before he cleaned up his act. So it's very ferocious atmosphere, very small club. It's very well recorded. But what I like about it, and the same with 1969, is that unlike most live albums, these actually are live albums. There are no overdubs. I love Get Your Ya-Ya's Out. Fantastic album, but it's not a live album. They redid solos.
They tinkered with it.
Make it sound better. But with a stereo binaural recorder, you can't do that. You get two tracks.
Right.
You can't change anything. It's also very funny. It's basically a long stand-up comedy act. Not for everyone's taste, because, he will be doing Walk on the Wild Side and spend most of the time talking about how he wrote Walk on the Wild Side rather than actually doing the song. You can hear the audience all the time. There's fantastic heckling and him heckling the hecklers. Bruce Springsteen's in the audience. He does a shout out to him.
Oh, really?
That's
yes,
good.
he appears to be one of the few people that Lou Reed liked at the time. Yes, he said, Bruce Springsteen's all right. He gets my seal of approval. And he has a long rant about Robert Christdow, the
critic. Yes, he would do.
Yes, very, very long rant about him. It's great. It opens with a sound of a match as he lights a cigarette, and and 1969 I think is special because it is live, and for me it's one of the few times where they capture the live feel, and most of the versions here are better than the original studio versions, which is unusual. Usually bands sound good live, but when you record them and release them on a record, it's kind of disappointing. There are exceptions, obviously. I mean, Live at Leeds is a great album, but I think these are better.
I tell you, one other great, I think, is the Sam Cooke. Do you know, Live at the Harlem Square Club? Fantastic record, recorded in 63. I don't think it was put out till the mid-80s, actually. And just in terms of hearing the audience and the audience reaction and feeling you're there, it's phenomenal.
Well, this you know that one, Dave, I haven't heard it. So perhaps I can't claim that these are the two greatest live albums. Maybe I'll just claim they're the two greatest live albums by Lou Reed, you know.
No, you're entitled to your opinion. I'm sure you're right.
It's very interesting. It's very interesting, the kind of the idea that it wasn't the most live records are mucked about with afterwards, you know. And the Sam Cooke is an interesting point because they'd listened to it at the time and thought, we can't put that out because that's not the Sam Cooke we want to sell. You know, and therefore it sat in a vault for 20 years and then somebody put it out. I was reading the other day, you know, the story of the Keith Jarrett Cologne concerts.
Yes.
I know
the albums well. I'm not sure if I know the story.
Well, the story is that he was persuaded to play an after-hours concert at the Cologne Opera House in 1975, I think it is. And the promoter was a 16-year-old girl. She was the youngest promoter in Germany, and she ordered the piano that he'd asked for. And the stagehands put the wrong piano on stage. It was a baby grand rather than a grand. It was inadequate. The pedals didn't work. It needed regular retuning. He wasn't going to do the gig because he was tired. His back was gone. He hadn't eaten, but he decided to go ahead with it. It's midnight in Cologne. He goes on stage. He does 2 hours of completely improvised piano.
Yeah. Amazing.
It's the biggest selling solo jazz record of all time.
And funnily enough, I read just yesterday that Miles Davis actually called him and asked him, how do you do it? Like, how do you just improvise? Because Miles Davis would improvise, but he'd have notes and plans. And he was amazed that Keith Jarrett could do this. And Miles Davis was not known for his
very generosity
to white Americans. You know.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. There wouldn't be a lot of that kind of thing going on.
This is totally off the track, but when I was driving here, I was listening to your podcast, the one with the mention of James Bond.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
The very strong argument, you could not possibly have an American James Bond. And I want to strengthen that argument by pointing out they once tried a non-English James Bond. Do you remember George Lazenby?
George Lazenby, yeah.
Lasted one picture.
Proudly Australian.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think if you can't have an Australian James Bond, you certainly cannot have an American one.
That's absolutely true.
That put the tin lid on it.
I'm glad you agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, look, very nice to join you on your birthday or near your birthday. Remind us what your shop is again, if anybody listening is in Sydney.
It is called Tengu Records.
Tengu.
Tengu.
Tengu, right?
I'm going to show you the sign, then people can see. And I'm going to show you the Tengu because this is worth seeing. Hang on.
Oh, the mythical beast.
Out the street now. Here you go.
Out the street. Yeah. Wow, there he is.
That's the sign.
That's fantastic.
And a bit of interaction with a amused passerby. So, yes, that's us.
Very good.
Let's hope your Japanese imprints sell well. I'm sure they will. Lovely to talk to you.
This podcast was brought to you by The Word.